Kate Showalter vividly remembers the first time she ever tried psychedelic mushrooms.
I think I was 22, and I was in Maryland with my friend Ashley, and it was fun. And we watched a movie, Sword in the Stone, and we were on the second floor, and it was this huge thunderstorm, and it was so beautiful, and all the cars looked so tiny down on the road, and the people looked tiny, and the trees. It was hilarious.
This was quite a while ago. 17 years, she thinks. Kate used them just one more time after that. She kind of got over it. Even as her home state of Colorado became one of the first in the nation to legalize psilocybin, and as psychedelics have re-entered the mainstream over the last few years. But now Kate is 39, and she's recently returned to psychedelics for a much more serious reason. Kate has cancer. Kate's part of a research project based at the University of Colorado's medical campus. It's one of the largest trials happening in the country right now for the potential medical benefits of psilocybin, the compound in magic mushrooms. Governments in the Western world have started to allow this drug's recreational use, and that's happening in medicine too. That's why I went to see Kate at her family's home in Denver. Just noticing all the plants in the window. I was like, that seems like a heavy door to open. I have never been in a house that tells me so much about somebody's family and what's important to them. Like, Kate's an artist. Her paintings are all over the walls, even if they're not quite done yet.
You know, I haven't touched a lot of these in many years, but there's some that I will go back to and finally finish.
Jewelry she's made is on display in a little nook, and her husband's musical instruments are spread out around the house. Can I just point out that on your piano is the musical score to Beverly Hills Cop?
Yes. My husband is extremely talented and the funniest person I know. And so it's, you know, the combination of both is right there.
It's not like the house is cluttered. It's just full of stories. Like, I can imagine her and her mom collecting the gemstones that fill a glass case by the piano.
I don't see how I could live in a place that wasn't funky.
My favorite part is the sunroom, which is completely crowded with plants. How many plants do you think are in this room?
I don't know.
If you just had to guess.
I definitely over 100.
Kate's the plant doctor for all her friends, so she knows just how to care for all of them. But lately she's struggled to remember the plants' names because of her intensive chemotherapy.
That's the most difficult with chemo brain, is that I can picture it in my mind and I can't bring them up at the moment. But I know how to take care of them all.
She got the cancer diagnosis 2 years ago, at a time when the life she and her husband were building was just starting to feel whole. She did 35 rounds of radiation, 7 rounds of chemotherapy, but the cancer still reached her lungs. On July 27th, 2022, the doctors told her it was terminal. She could continue treatment, but the outlook wasn't good. Did you feel prepared for that moment?
No, and I was. We went camping, I think, the day after. Michael said we need to get out of here. So we went up to the Netherlands and found a place. I did a lot of forest screaming and just crying.
The cancer had started around her neck and ear on the left side. The treatments have paralyzed part of her face and made her deaf in one ear. A surgically embedded gold weight helps her close one eye. But what's worried Kate the most is her daughter, Rooney, who was a toddler when Kate first got sick a couple years ago. Even then, Rooney was intuitive. She knew that something was wrong, that her mom might not get better.
We were snuggling, and she was going to sleep, and that's when she asked me.
Rooney asked whether Kate would die. Kate had been thinking about the same thing, and about what would happen afterward. She was consumed by this question of what life might be like for Rooney in this house without her mom. Kate would burst into tears just talking to her daughter, or she'd be gripped by panic attacks.
Your adrenaline is pumping, and you feel like you're having a heart attack, and you just, it's just, your hands are sweaty and you're having a hard time. You can't catch your breath.
It felt like this anxiety was eating up whatever time she did have with Rooney and with her husband, Michael. A lot of people dealing with cancer have the same experience: demoralization, hopelessness, despair. Sometimes it's called existential distress. And that is why Kate Showalter decided to try psychedelics again. She wanted help with the anxiety so she could focus on fighting the cancer and enjoy the time she's here. So Kate has joined an experiment which is at the very forefront of this renaissance that started in Western medicine. It's one of the first major trials with psilocybin to be funded by the federal government's National Institutes of Health. If the project's scientists in Colorado and New York are right, it could have profound implications for all kinds of conditions. Beyond cancer, people dealing with anxiety, depression, chronic pain, PTSD, maybe even addiction, some of the toughest issues we face, could find benefits in this therapy. This is Colorado in Depth. I'm Andrew Kenney. I've been reporting on the decriminalization of psychedelic mushrooms here for years. That's how I found out about the experiment that Kate's part of. I was surprised to learn that one of the researchers who designed Kate's study has wanted to do this for 50 years. For all that time, psychedelics have not been taken seriously. So why did it take so long? And could a drug really help with a challenge as profound as facing your own death? That's what we're digging into in this episode. This research project Kate's part of, you can trace its roots directly back, more than a half century and 800 miles north, to an unlikely place.
How do you say that name again, Dad?
Saskatchewan, son.
Oh, come
No,
on.
just kidding.
Oh,
I know
come
Saskatchewan.
on, Dad. It's Saskatchewan.
This is an old tourism video for Saskatchewan. It's a place about as big as Texas, but with only a little over 1 million people. Geographically, it extends north from the Great Plains of the U.S. Saskatchewan's mostly known for its grain fields and its frigid winters.
It's an inhospitable climate that we live in, and a place that I think people have to really choose to go to.
Erica Dick is a historian based in Saskatchewan.
It's not kind of on the way to something, and it's not a real destination for a number of people. And yet from that, I think has sprung a really interesting intellectual research environment.
That included experiments in socialized medicine and a lot of research into psychedelics in the 1950s and 60s. It started when an English doctor named Humphrey Osmond moved to Saskatchewan. He invented the term psychedelics.
My wife always is vexed by the fact that we didn't find some way of registering this valuable word. She says it shows how short-sighted we were.
Osmond and others at universities and clinics in Saskatchewan used LSD to study schizophrenia, alcoholism, and creativity. And even back then, researchers elsewhere were doing experiments focused on people with terminal cancer. They found evidence that LSD substantially reduced those patients' anxiety and distress. Remember, this was 70 years before Kate Showalter's diagnosis. There was a chance to explore what psychedelics could do for people facing down death. It all pointed to the idea that psychedelics could help the brain break its routines and maybe think in new ways. The researchers in Saskatchewan also partnered with Indigenous people in the area, says Erica, the historian. Several Indigenous communities have used psychedelics for spiritual purposes, including in Canada, where a group taught the Western scientists lessons about what a psychedelic therapy clinic could look and feel like.
you can find evidence of the influence of the Native American church in helping to think through different ways of designing group contexts, for example, or think about the influence of music.
So at this point, a blossoming field of research was starting to unfold. It attracted graduate students from all over, including a young man in Kansas named Jim Grigsby.
I had read a lot of the literature that had been completed by that time, and it was encouraging. It occurred to me that it was a possibility that I'd be able to be involved in some psychedelic research, but I didn't know.
Many years later, Jim would become a driving force behind Kate's psychedelics trial in Colorado. This research in Canada was the beginning of it for him. Jim came from a working-class family in Joplin, Missouri. His dad had only attended a semester of college, and Jim had a hard time sticking with it, too.
I dropped out and ran a jackhammer for a while, and dropped out another time and loaded trucks.
But he was fascinated by psychology and psychedelics. Like a lot of young people around that time, he had his first experiences with LSD when he was attending the University of Kansas.
There was just this sense of everything was perfect as it was, and in a sense that reality is totally simple, and in spite of its complexity, and just this sense of peace that I can still recall very well, as though I were experiencing it again, you know.
Acid was not all profound revelations for Jim. One time, it seemed like it gave him superpowers playing football.
It was like I had all the time in the world to catch it.
He knows it's a goofy story, but it helped convince him that these drugs are capable of really influencing our experiences in the world. After having his mind blown, he decided to study the brain itself. He applied to a master's program in Saskatchewan, which you heard was a North American leader in doing research with LSD. But when he got there, it was not how he had pictured it. After a break, what happened to the promising early discoveries in Western medical research into psychedelics? In the summer of 1974, 24-year-old Jim Grigsby got into his blue Datsun station wagon and embarked on his great adventure.
Yeah, I loaded everything I had in my car and drove up there.
But there was something he didn't quite grasp yet. A series of events of historical proportions had changed what would be possible for psychedelics research.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative...
The war on drugs. The U.S. government put LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, and more on a list of substances that had, quote, no accepted medical use. After that, the pharmaceutical industry lost interest in psychedelics trials. There was also a second historical event, a more surprising reason the medical trials got sidelined. The US and Canada ramped up their regulation because of one of the worst prescription drug disasters in history.
On Christmas Day in 1956, a baby girl was born in Germany without ears.
The baby's mom had taken a pill called thalidomide. It was supposedly safe, but 10,000 kids were born with anomalies like missing arms or legs. The regulators who had approved the drug had failed to protect the kids and their families. As a result, clinical trials got a lot stricter. When Jim arrived in Saskatchewan in 1974, he learned that research opportunities with psychedelics had dried up. For the next several decades, even the research that had already been done was put on a dark, dusty shelf. People who study psychiatry have told me they didn't even hear about the Saskatchewan LSD trials in their many years in school.
As far as I knew, the door to psychedelic research was permanently closed.
But Jim got some advice from a mentor in Canada who told him if you stick around long enough, maybe the door will open back up. Jim decided to stay in the field of brain science. Turns out he loved it, and he built up a substantial career. Decades later, in 2001, he helped discover a neurodegenerative disease that hadn't been identified before. They named it FAXTAS for short.
People had no idea what it was, so by the fact that we had discovered it, we were already years ahead of other researchers.
But even as he plowed ahead, Jim felt society was missing out on the potential of drugs like LSD and psilocybin.
And, you know, the thing about psychedelics, too, is we haven't even begun to touch what they can tell us.
Beyond, like, the kind of personal disappointment, as that door closed socially, did you grasp at the time, like, the fact that a whole avenue of science was getting cut off in a way?
Yeah, because it just seemed kind of crazy when it looked so promising to shut it down.
It's not just researchers who have been shut out. The pause left families wondering if they missed out on potential therapies during all those decades. That includes the family of Kate Showalter, who we met earlier at her house. She told me that long before her own diagnosis, her mom had cancer. It was horrible. Remember, Kate's in a psilocybin trial right now to help with the psychological side of cancer. Her mom didn't have an option like that. The family really struggled to cope.
She was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was a freshman in high school. So, I was a very lost teenager, very angry, lost teenager.
Kate and her mom had been close. The family lived on a farm south of Denver and raised all sorts of animals and plants. Was it your mom who was the plant keeper?
I think it stemmed from my mom. I mean, so I grew up with 20-foot tall trees in my house. Yeah, a giant atrium in the middle of the house.
But when her mom got sick, her parents didn't really explain what was happening. They were struggling with the same questions about life and death that so many parents do.
Actually, my dad told me. And he sat me down in my room, and I remember being in the middle of the floor and just him telling me that it was going to be okay, but that my mom had cancer, but she was going to get surgery and go through chemo, and everything was going to be okay.
That wasn't really true.
I found out that it had metastasized on my own through listening, what they're talking about.
Kate was 17 when her mom died. It splintered her family.
I was a pretty good student up until then, A's and B's, and once we found out she had cancer, I just started failing everything. I think I was so blindsided by the fact that my mom had died, and I was angry that she didn't tell me the truth. I was angry that she left me.
Kate was lost. It was the kind of trauma and fallout that some of the early psychedelics researchers had been trying to address before their work got cut off. Now, as she faces her own cancer, she is participating in the psilocybin study because she hopes her story will go differently.
I always said that if I ever got cancer, I would tell my daughter. I would tell her things.
After a break, Jim teams up with an expert on death and dying to start one of the largest medical trials for psychedelics in the country. We'll find out what trials like theirs are showing for patients like Kate. today, Jim Grigsby works at the University of Colorado at its campuses in Denver and in Aurora. But when he's not there, he's at home in a really small mountain town above Boulder.
This is, it's nominally part of the town of Ward, but we like it up here, so.
We're making our way up the flagstone path, and we're coming up. I found a German Shepherd.
That's Django, and this one's Liza.
Hi, Django. Hi, Liza. This is where Jim himself has taken psychedelics on occasion over the years, feeding his interest in the drugs and what they can do to the brain.
So I continued to experiment with it. I think I was trying to understand the nature of myself and of selves generally.
This woodsy private cabin has kind of been the perfect place for this personal research project, because until recently, psychedelics had such a bad reputation in his profession that he could not talk openly about it.
Well, it was kind of lonely. You kind of had to keep it quiet. You know, you'll be branded as a nut or, you know, just a dangerous person. Nobody at work knew. It was a secret.
But that has started to change. The war on drugs has faded, and there's been a major backlash to addictive opioids, with a strong desire to come up with an alternative for pain management. In 2010, Jim participated in an early study of another once-forbidden drug, serving as a psychiatrist on a clinical trial of MDMA for post-traumatic stress.
Well, it was a very positive result. They were people who had had PTSD for 15 years or more and had had lots of treatments and had not gotten better, but then this package of non-drug sessions and 3 drug sessions eliminated the PTSD. We found, in fact, at the roughly 1-year follow-up, 3/4 of the people in the study no longer met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD.
That was with MDMA, which is part of the drug known as ecstasy. With psilocybin, Johns Hopkins University took the lead. And in 2016, a small study found that some people with cancer found relief from anxiety and depression for 6 months, with just 1 large dose of psilocybin. In another trial, they also found that psychedelic experiences can make people less afraid to die. This idea of using psychedelics to confront death has a long history, including that preliminary research that Western scientists did in Canada in the 50s. As Jim followed the new research, he started to believe that psilocybin could change how people relate to cancer and to mortality.
And it's been apparent to me for quite a while that the brain is incredibly malleable, plastic, and changeable in ways that can work against you, but that for the most part are pretty beneficial.
A leading theory is that the drug, combined with therapy, can improve people's neuroplasticity, their ability to change their minds. So Jim called a friend at the University of Colorado to see if they could do something big.
And I said, you know, I'm thinking about trying to do a study with psilocybin, looking at palliative care. And she says, well, call Stacy.
That would be Stacy Fisher. She's deeply versed in care for people who are dying.
I am Stacy Fisher. I am a geriatrician by training and a palliative care clinician in research for about the last 20-odd years.
Stacy is also from Missouri, just like Jim. And yet if Jim is a wanderer, Stacy was an extremely focused young woman, kind of a Doogie Howser type.
I graduated when I was 23 years old as a doctor. So I was from med school.
But as she was studying, her mom was sick. She was dying of cancer, which is one thing that drew Stacy's interest to palliative care.
She died while I was in med school. She died at home in hospice. I think my journey through med school was one of the things I think she was so proud of.
Stacy wanted to make it easier on the whole family to go through something like that because she'd never felt prepared herself. She's made a big mark in palliative care. And to this day, she finds that terminal illness is something that we all struggle to confront. Like when she talks to medical students, she asks, "Can you say the word death?"
Can you say dying? Can you say dead? And once you kind of shine a light on it and open up that discussion, then sometimes you can put it away and live.
Stacy got interested in studies coming out that suggested psychedelics may be able to help with that. But unlike Jim, she had zero personal experience with the drugs.
No, none at all.
Their interests came together just as the national freeze on psychedelics started to thaw. At the time, voters in Colorado were getting ready to decriminalize mushrooms and psilocybin. And similar new laws were taking effect in places from Oregon to Australia, a sign of growing social acceptance, especially for therapeutic uses of the drugs. Most importantly for patients like Kate, the National Institutes of Health finally started to provide federal funding for research into psychedelics' therapeutic value. Jim and Stacy, along with their co-investigator Stephen Ross at New York University, had a vision of a major clinical trial.
Jim's a great scientist, so of course he knew, if we're going to really change the way things happened, it has to be something substantial.
The trials so far had been interesting but small. Jim and Stacy wanted to show more conclusively, is there a clinical benefit and is it meaningful enough that Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurers might start to support psychedelic treatments? It took years, but Stacy remembers the day they finally learned they would get federal funding to work with up to 200 cancer patients. She was alone at home, giddy with excitement.
I was just shaking, rubber legs, I can't believe this is happening.
Jim had a more mixed reaction.
Mostly I was very excited, but I was also kind of irritated. And I thought, well, it's about time.
They're getting a little over $3 million. Stacy hopes that they can make progress on the intractable problem of existential distress.
I would say my hope is the psychedelics were the first promise of something that could really shift that feeling of demoralization, hopelessness, and despair.
For Jim, it's a chance to reopen the door that closed all those years ago in Canada. All this time, the idea of using psilocybin to understand the brain had seemed so obvious and so far out of reach.
It's been there all along, and a lot of people knew it, but couldn't do the work.
Up next, the experiment itself and how it's changed Kate's life. The building on the university medical campus where this research happens is huge, and it's gleaming with a soaring atrium in the middle. The way it works is one patient at a time comes here to get a dose under supervision. Their participation in the trial is 1 dose of psilocybin plus talk therapy appointments before and after.
While we're waiting on them, can you describe just basically what we're in here doing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We're in here actually getting the product.
I'm in a highly secure closet with a pharmacy specialist named Jackie Bainbridge. She handles the substances before they're served to the patients.
So we're in here getting either placebo or psilocybin. We're being videotaped right now. So there's somebody watching us because it's Schedule 1 products. And that's why we have the double lock system. And then also we have the lock on the door.
It's kind of funny being in this closet. You can get psilocybin a lot of places around Colorado now, even more so with marijuana, which is another of the substances locked in here for a different study. Anyway, you might be picturing actual mushrooms in a little plastic baggie. Not the case. The psilocybin behind lock and key here comes from a lab. It's synthesized with chemistry. There aren't even any mushrooms involved in making this super high dose of the drug. The storage room is so secure that Jackie needs 2 keys to get the pill out for this morning's patient.
We're having a hard time locating our other key. So, excuse me for 1 second.
What the patient will see is a little white pill, so the researchers can disguise whether it's the psilocybin or the placebo. When they finally get it out of the locker, they take it downstairs to a patient who's just arrived. When this experiment first got going more than a year ago, the emails from people who wanted to participate came in one after the other. Kate Showalter was one of the first patients in the study. She wanted help with this debilitating fear that she would die and leave her daughter behind, just like what she had gone through.
My biggest fear was she gonna remember me? I don't want to die, but my main concern is Rooney. Yeah. You know, I don't want her to go through what I went without Mom.
Kate's also fighting the cancer itself. Even with a terminal prognosis, she's pursuing a first-of-its-kind experimental course of drugs and chemo. She and Rooney, who's 5 now, think it's gonna work.
She believes that I'm gonna be the first person to beat this cancer, and I feel the same way. I'm gonna be the first to beat this cancer.
At the same time, she's sought out ways to calm her nerves and live her days, including strategies her mom never had access to. So when her psychiatrist mentioned the psilocybin experiment, Kate jumped at it.
Yeah, you know, it has been debilitating, this anxiety. It's been a constant companion. Before cancer, I had this endless well of patience for my daughter. And when cancer came, I lost that. And so I wanted to see if there was something I could do to kind of have that go away.
Kate went to her dosing day in August 2023. They presented her with a white pill in a colorful beaded bowl that she'd selected. Neither she nor the researchers in the room knew whether the pill was psilocybin or a placebo.
30 minutes passed and my heart started racing. I was like, oh my goodness, maybe this is happening. But then it didn't. It was, oh my goodness. But in all honesty, I think that it was okay that I got the placebo because I took a 4.5-hour nap. I was so exhausted. I didn't sleep the night before. I just didn't get much sleep anyways, but I think I was so anxious because of it. So, and they filmed the whole thing for the study, so they got me taking a nap, and then I ate an apple, and then, and that was it.
It was a little disappointing. The way this trial works, though, she was guaranteed to get a second chance, and this time she would definitely get the psilocybin. That was going to be 6 months later in February. By the time that day came, things had actually changed a bit for Kate. She had gotten some really great news. The experimental treatment she's doing to fight the disease itself seemed to be working. It had made her cancer undetectable on at least one test, but it came with huge caveats.
They say 50-50, but they don't know.
50-50.
50-50 chance that it'll come back, but they don't know with my cancer because this has never happened before.
So the fear and anxiety wouldn't go away. That's what she was hoping would change when she returned to that small, comfortably lit room and took the pill, the real one this time. She'd brought some things from home, including Rooney's favorite stuffed animal.
They actually made me tea, and I had it with some ginger turmeric tea, and within, we were just chatting, and within 15 minutes, I was like, whoa. I think I could feel it in my fingers, and I was just, that's when the therapist said to me, okay, so I think that it's time for you to put on the shades and lay back.
She put on the eye shades, which would help her concentrate. They put music into her headphones, and she was transported for 5 hours.
like I said, I had the shades on, and then all of a sudden, all these rainbow, beautiful colors started to seep in, and then they turned into like geometric patterns and like fluid, I mean, just chaotic everywhere, but like beauty in the chaos, and just like geometric fluid going into wormholes, and it was very interesting. Like, it was like the colors would come from like in between my eyes, or they would rush up from below or come from above and come through me.
Amid that kaleidoscope of light, she could sense a dullness on the left side of her face where the cancer had started.
On the left side, the colors were a little more dull, and that was interesting. I didn't really quite understand that, and I was like, why are you dull over there? So I would, with my breath, I could send the color, the rainbow, beautiful colors over to that side of my visions.
And in some abstract way, toward the end, she felt her mother's energy draw near.
You know, I was with her anger and her sadness, and my anger and sadness, and just, you know, and just her pride in me, and then I came out of it. My brain kind of came back to my body.
After she left the clinic, when she saw Rooney, it really hit home.
Oh, yes. I cried, actually. Just so excited to see her, you know. And then I have that patience for her again. It's back. So I don't know when the anxiety will come back, but it's just been such a blessing to have these 4 weeks with no anxiety.
The panic attacks, the fear, hadn't come back in the month since her dosing. She thinks the power of the experience was not just its beauty, but the way it overwhelmed her. Somehow, the total loss of control led to acceptance.
Oh, there's just so much more room for everything. Just, I feel a sense of peace, calm, tranquil.
In the weeks immediately following Kate's dose, she kept doing therapy sessions as part of the trial. It's that time right after a profound psilocybin trip when the research suggests the most work can be done to rewire the brain. This period when the brain is most plastic, Stacy says.
That's where real growth and change can occur. And when we can get out of these patterns or cycles or spirals that are not serving us well.
Jim and Stacy's study is one of dozens on psilocybin going on nationwide. So far, the results are promising. Even Canada, where a lot of this started, is rebooting research into psychedelics, easing up on some of those restrictions. As Stacy and Jim have gotten into this years-long project, it's made them think about their own mortality too.
All the time.
Yeah.
Every day.
Exactly. I was just going to say, every day, several times a day, often. Yeah.
But their work here is not just about death. It's about how to navigate life. Jim is curious whether this therapy could help with chemo brain, that phenomenon that made Kate forget the names of her plants.
We've been studying that for about 30 years and still don't have a good understanding of what it's about or how to treat it.
He also thinks about people who have the syndrome he helped discover. They never found a cure, but maybe psilocybin therapy could help people live with the knowledge that they have this disease. Jim and Stacy say researchers are even exploring whether it could help with cancer itself. If psilocybin can reduce depression, increase somebody's activity level, improve their sleep, maybe that could reduce inflammation in their body. But there are a lot of limitations. This is clinical research happening under close supervision with a trained therapist. And while the benefits can last a year or longer for some patients, for others it might be just a few weeks. And some people are expecting a miracle.
I think a lot of people come into it thinking, oh, this is great. I'll take some psilocybin and I'm going to feel so much better. I'll feel kind of like a new start in my life, even though I'm dying. And it doesn't quite work that way.
The project has its challenges too, where I thought it might be easier to do in Colorado because of the decriminalization of psilocybin and greater cultural acceptance. Stacy says it's actually the opposite.
When patients come through the study, if they are randomized to a placebo and are feeling really disappointed or demoralized because they didn't get the drug, I think we also worry that they could go out and then seek psilocybin elsewhere and really distort our findings.
Maybe the biggest caveat is that psilocybin just doesn't work for everyone. A trip can turn into a nightmare.
Sometimes people have really difficult experiences and don't want to be in that moment anymore.
Jim and Stacy are also thinking about how their work relates to Indigenous experiences. They acknowledge that psilocybin specifically was not discovered so much as taken from a Mazatec healer in Mexico by a white banker and explorer. It ruined the healer's life.
I am very concerned around like the colonialization and kind of co-opting even more or worse this cultural appropriating these traditional practices into this study. And so it's something I think I'm still struggling with quite a bit. And how do we do that? How do we do that in the right way? And I don't have answers yet. It's something I'm still thinking about and exploring personally.
Concern about cultural appropriation has risen as money for this research grows. Jim hopes greater awareness can make a difference and that there will be research opportunities for everyone. He wasn't sure if he would ever get the chance to do this kind of research either.
It feels in some ways a little bit weird that it took this long to get to something that I had hoped to be able to do from the beginning. But at the same time, it's kind of cool just to get there. So I've always kind of considered being in science a privilege in a way. You get to think stuff up and then test it to see if you're right. So I figured now I've got an opportunity to learn some new things about this, and I'm going to do it for as long as I can, till I drop, I suppose.
For Kate, her day in the dosing room brought a moment of resolution for the loss that marked the end of her childhood when her mom died. She wishes her mom could have gotten this help too, from the therapy and the psilocybin.
Oh, I wish she had this opportunity. I wish that the war on drugs really didn't come to fruition. We are so far behind what we could be, what could have been already. They're playing catch up, and that's just unfortunate. Because this really, it could help with PTSD, with veterans, with postpartum, with just any anxiety and depression,
Do you think things could have gone differently for your family?
Yes, actually. Yeah, definitely. Not just for my mom, but maybe for me instead of giving me antidepressants,
But she and I have to wrap our conversation up, actually, so that she can pick up Rooney. We walk about 10 minutes toward the elementary school, past bushes tipped with new spring buds.
Oh, it's springtime. It's coming.
I was just going to say that. Rooney's on the playground outside the kindergarten. She wears sparkly red shoes, red tights, and a black and white dress that she picked out herself.
Yep, Rooney's over there playing with Annie, eating some Smarties.
After some coaxing and a few more orbits of the playground, Rooney hops on her scooter toward home. She flashes ahead down the sidewalk, then stops to pick up rocks for her mom's collection at home. When they get there, they round the side of the house, and Rooney opens the gate.
This is really hard to open. Here's my dog. What I was talking about earlier.
Colorado's psilocybin trial will continue for years. Dozens and dozens more people will volunteer for this grand inquiry into death and life. But Kate has done her part. She follows Rooney into their home. Whatever time they have it together.
I have a sister, too. It's a fish. Do you want to come and see? She's a beta. She's blue, pink, and purple. This is one of my special stuffies. And if you want to see something very cool...
CPR News reporter Andrew Kenney reported and wrote that story. The University of Colorado trial is still accepting new patients. The researchers say to talk to your oncologist if you're interested, to see if you're eligible. This episode of Colorado In Depth was scored, mixed, and sound designed by Luis Antonio Perez. It was edited by me, Rachel Estabrook. Thanks also to CPR's Sam Brash, Joe Erickson, Haley Sanchez, Andrea Dukakis, and Kevin Dale, who's the executive producer. Thanks to the librarians at the University of Regina for their help finding archived materials, and to Dr. Brian Barnett for his insight, as well as to everyone we talked to for this story. For more stories like this from the CPR Newsroom, follow Colorado In Depth in your podcast app. This is CPR News.